Morning all. There's a very interesting game from yesterday in the Bilbao Masters 2012. Magnus Carlsen playing white, who's the highest rated player in the world on the FIDE rating list at the moment, and Vishy Anand, or Vishy Anand, who's the current world champion. According to ChessBase, this is the first win of by Magnus against Vishy on the classical time controls, which I find interesting. So let's have a look at this game. Magnus playing white kicked off with e4. We saw a Sicilian defense from Vishy. After knight f3, d6, we see bishop b5 check. This is becoming increasingly popular as a new approach to the Sicilian defense, avoiding the mainline d4. So bishop d7, white exchanges off those bishops, and he doesn't mind playing c4, setting up the dreaded Maroczy bind with the bad bishop out of here, putting pawns on light squares and making use of this complementary bishop on the dark squares would seem a very good idea. After the knight f6, knight c3, Vishy decides to fianchetto now his bishop. Classic dark square control strategy. d4, not leaving a hole on d4 because black could intensify the pressure on d4 and try and secure it later with, say, a knight. So breaking the d4 square control from black. C takes d4, knight takes d4, but black has some opportunities. It has squares to play. C file frontal attack on the C pawn. Bishop g7. Okay, and now f3, which kind of implies that bishop e3 would be nice without any nuisance of knight g4. Queen c7 hitting that c pawn, which is defended now with b3. In fact, it turns out that queen c7 in this position, although it looks quite sensible, might have been the first theoretical opening novelty, according to the ChessBase report I've just read. So queen c7 could be the new theory move here, believe it or not. Does it waste time? Is it a bit too artificial? Should black have been developing pieces? Well, after b3, queen a5, pinning the knight. Okay, bishop b2. There's no tactical shot here. Black just puts more pressure on d4 now. After castles, black castles as well. And now we see knight ce2. So what is going on here? This knight is being supported. It's on this diagonal. This is a loose piece here on b2. But black plays now rook fd8, which does have some tactical ideas to do with d4 and the queen on d1. But is d8, the rook on d8, ideal here? Bishop c3, kicking the queen to b6. Now a latent property in this position is the queen and rook on this diagonal, and this bishop's looking at a5, bear that in mind. Bishop's looking at a5 here. So we see things really sharpening up now after king h1, getting away from that dangerous diagonal. Black was threatening perhaps e5 as well. Now Vishy plays d5, which you might think is really surprising, trying to break the bind immediately without any preparation like e6 and d5. And here, tactically, well, we'll do a second pass through the game after, but basically the basic crux is any pawn capture here. Knight takes d5 might be good because of this nasty pin putting huge pressure on d4 here, which is difficult, so black would be better there. But we'll do a second pass through the game after. So for the moment, d5, it's not a good idea apparently to take it. So knight takes c6, which weakens black's control of a5. Remember that a5, that skewer line. B takes c6 to support the d5 pawn. And now, making use of the a5 square, this very cunning little queen move. Queen e1. These little queen moves are often of great significance. Spassky was fond of them against Fischer in the Grunfelds, but here it's directly implying bishop a5 to skewer the queen and rook. Okay, so Vishy hasn't got really time to munch on e4. He moves the rook away from the skewer. But now the queen is also multi-purpose on the e file. And this is a very interesting continuation now. After e5, the knight's driven back. And now e6. Temporary pawn sacrifice, dislocating black's position in two, breaking communications, and weakening black's king. King safety has been shot to pieces here. Well, nearly, because losing that dark square bishop, the black king side is going to be weaker. F takes e6, knight f4. So can white get rid of the dark square bishops and infiltrate on the dark squares? Communication is a bit lost here from the queen side pieces to the king side. Bishop takes c3. Okay, queen takes c3. So Vishy is banking on getting some communication back with these two pawn moves to at least try and protect a6, and then maybe even stuff like this, if needed, to protect e6 from the frontal attack. Can he do this? d4, queen d2, now c5. So he's starting to protect e6. His communication is that bad. Rook a e1. Now protecting again e6, and the knight also potentially threatens to come to f5, because maybe f5 to e3 would be quite nice, making use of that d pawn. g4, keeping the knight out, and now rook c6. Okay, it's difficult to suggest an easy plan for black here. Magnus goes into a very crude attacking mode here, which is justified. Black's position is dislocated. He is a pawn down. He's going to justify this dislocating pawn sack. He goes for the soft spot here, h7, with this next move, knight h3. The queen wants to install herself nicely on h6 for knight g5 to threaten h6 soft spot. Black plays knight e8, and now queen h6. The installation procedure starts. Knight f6, knight g5. For the moment, black's holding up. How can white break this down? Well, there's the continual forcing threat of knight takes h7. Can that be maximised? Vishy now tries the move d3, but in this position, okay, there's a couple of plans. You might think, put pressure on e6, try and stop d3. This is a bit worrying. If you try and win e6, then this d2 is going to be a bit of a menace at the tail end of combinations. But this next move really marks out white's advantage. I wonder if you can spot it. You want to celebrate the possibility of knight takes h7, that's the clue. So what would you play here as white? If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Okay? Rook e5. The point is that there's possibilities now of knight takes h7, knight takes h7, queen takes g6, and the rook swinging along that fifth rank, making use of the newly created h5 square by knocking out that g6 pawn. That'd be really, really dangerous. So Vishy's next move is designed against that. We'll look at some specific variations in the second pass through this game. For the moment, king h8 does seem to parry the immediate knight takes h7 threat. But now we see rook d1, and it's very difficult to defend that pawn. If rook d8, there's actually even stronger than knight f7 is just to distract the rook with rook takes d3, and then the queen coming to f8. Just quickly show you that small variation. Rook takes d3, queen f8, and splat, knight f7 mate. So after rook d1, this is very difficult now. What can Vishy do if he can't protect the pawn? Rook d6 would seem to run into knight f7 check. He can't protect this pawn. So, difficult position indeed, the d3 pawn being victimised. Vishy tries this artificial looking move, like he's deeper blue versus Kasparov trying to win a pawns. If he's reduced to that, the position is a bit miserable. Now, Magnus simply just played a4, a natural looking move, because now if b3 is attacked, he can win d3 and protect b3. And here, Anand's not very pleased with his position at all, understandably, and resigns. He resigns here at move 30. a crushing defeat of the world champion. Dislocated position with this temporary pawn sacrifice. Very, very powerful stuff. A crude installation procedure over here, but really high class though, because it's combining attacks on other sides of the board. This pawn, this rook infiltration to e5, subtle, elegant attacking chess. Let's have a look at it again, a second pass through this game. But from here, let's do some engine analysis as well. What can black do here? Say queen c8, let's go with that. Rook takes d3, what would be a continuation here? Okay, equal on pawns, you might think. So how is white actually winning? King g2, let's follow this through a little bit. What would be a winning procedure? Well, we can come back to this weakness now to gang up on that. And we can forcibly win this pawn. Maybe knight takes e6 as suggested. And then back, and then e7 is the next target. So let's say that moves. Queen h4. It's miserable, but it's not an immediate mate or anything. But it's pretty dire. Just following this through. If white's got control of e5 now, coming to e5 would be quite powerful. You can imagine the black position slowly collapsing, or maybe not that slowly. Knight takes e6. So those e pawns in this particular example variation are dropping. Okay, so he didn't really want to play on from that position, because these two pawns, once this pawn's collected, these two pawns are next. That's not very nice. So let's go back from the start. The evaluation changes. So Sicilian defends with bishop b5. Maroczy bind set up. So queen c7, is it such a bad move? Well, let's see. So bishop e3 or b3. b3 was played here. Engine seems to like bishop e3 here, just giving up c4, which would have tested the novelty. Taking on c4, rook c1. This is quite a dangerous pawn sacrifice as well. Very dangerous. I wouldn't like to play this as black if this queen sacrifice is forced. Okay, it's murky, but I don't know. Surely that wasn't the idea, to sacrifice the queen there in this line. If so, that's a pretty amazing prepared concept. Let's just check that out again, if I can get back the computer. So bishop e3, let's sacrifice that pawn. Black sacrifices the queen for quite a few pieces. Knight a6. Okay, maybe this might well have been a prepared computer innovation. This queen c7. This might have been the idea behind it. This queen sacrifice here. With computers, you know, we can do more and more daring moves sometimes. But okay, it was ignored with b3 safely, sidestepped. That stuff. So queen a5, okay, bishop d2, or bishop b2 to protect the knight is okay. We see here the evaluation about equal. Evaluation about equal. King sidestepping pin. Okay, and here looking as though black has a promising position. But has the engine misevaluated this after queen e1? Is a stronger move just a5 then, leaving the rook on d8? What about a5? That's just a suggestion here to guard a5 basically. Do we still have this pawn sacrifice though? Is this being underestimated? Knight d7 or knight e8? Knight d7, let's go with knight d7. Isn't e6 still on the cards? Apparently d4 here might be interesting. this gets a bit murky. Here, knight c5. This might be a better continuation for black than the game, from an engine perspective anyway. Bishop f6. Maybe it's an easier defensive task. The d4 pawn looks stronger here, but it's about equal. It's about equal. It's not the end of the world for white or anything, even with that a5. But Vishy didn't play a5, so he plays this, and it seems to give white a smaller increase in advantage. So this e6, yes, this is a human intuitive move, visually dislocating the black position. Still, from an engine point of view, about equal. Not really that bothered about it either way at the moment. Maybe black's even a tiny bit better from engine eyes, but at the moment this installation looks really dangerous for black's king safety, with the queen coming to h6. The engine starts changing its tune here once this installation is set up, with the queen on h6 and the knight on g5. Changing its tune totally. Look at this advantage change. White's now technically looking strong here. Convinced the engine now. And rook e5, massive increase in advantage after d3. Rook e5, super powerful move. Rook h5. Did Vishy have to do d3? Let's play king at h8 instead. What would happen here? Rook e2. Let's not transpose into d3. I think just rook e5. So if we avoid playing d3 to get something different, the idea is just ganging up on e6 really. It's two attacks. It's difficult for black to do something about the frontal attack on e6 combined with the knight on g5 and h7. It's an overloading of the black position here, giving white the advantage. If queen e6 just crashing through with rook e6, there's no d3 save it. It's too far away to do anything. If d3 here, okay, let's go with this. Check. Knight e5. Here, rook d2, and that pawn looks like a goner if the queen's on d6. That's not an ideal defender. Now h4, it can even frame resources like h4 for the black king. So the black king will be creaking here after h5, undermining g6. Black's king safety is shot to pieces. Huge advantage again. So it looks as though this is really good stuff, this setup. Pawn down, opportunities like rook e5, which is taken here, fantastic. And this d3 pawn is just a goner now. So a4, end of game. Okay, hope you enjoyed this brief analysis of this game and got something out of it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Magnus is still showing great promise as the young prodigy he was. He's still massively in the limelight, and so leading Bilbao Masters, I believe now. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube.